Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the morning show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Monday, April 23rd, 2018. Sounding a little muffled today. We'll see if we can't move things a little bit closer and decide how to start the show. This morning, I got alarmed as I was watching Greg's feed of stories come in this morning, and wasn't entirely sure what I was looking at there. Briefly thought there was some serious emergency happening, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. What's happening this morning? Well, I don't know. I see that Fox News is carrying Sarah Huckabee Sanders's, basically repetition of her dad joke, her favorite dad joke, and it's no doubt that her dad has actually told this joke. But this is becoming kind of a tiresome line in which the White House press secretary is out there repeating the nonsense. At some point, I love her accent too. At some point, Democrats are going to have to decide whether they love this country more than they hate this president. And it's a pretty easy thing to actually decide. I mean, if I really had to decide between those two choices, I would say, easy. Love the country a lot more. And, of course, it's a simple thing. Most Democrats don't have any problem at all with the formula. They flow naturally from one another. This president, in his interest in destroying the country, is obviously and naturally the object of much hate from those who love the country, and probably the object of much hate from those who don't particularly like the country very much either. It's so easy to hate this president. It's like walking and chewing gum at the same time. It's not even that hard. It's like, I don't know, it's like walking and moving your feet rhythmically at the same time. And pretty simple thing to do. Doesn't require a lot of concentration or any extra energy, as far as I can tell. And the president makes that easy by serving a different country. So it's really not difficult at all. And I guess at some point, Republicans are going to have to decide which country they love more, the one they serve, by proxy perhaps, Russia, or the one they live in and are supposed to be working for. And I don't know, that seems like a more difficult task for them. They can't seem to separate the two, but it seems pretty simple for me. This weekend marked by another mass shooting. No doubt you've heard about this one, and I don't know, I guess I used to say we were proceeding with under the cloud of a mass shooting when these things happen, but there's not much cloud anymore. I mean, we've pretty much become jaded to these things. I don't know what the term we want to use is here. And I don't really know. I mean, we figured this day was coming, and I don't know, maybe it wasn't spectacular enough, and we don't want to let the lunatics know that because they'll only up the ante. A wacko shot up a Waffle House in Antioch, Tennessee. Antioch, Tennessee, by the way. Antioch, California, and Antioch, Tennessee. Centers of gun activity in both in gun fail and in intentional gun usage. They pop up a lot. There are certain hot spots around the country, and that's one of them. No surprise that the shooter showed up with an AR-15. No surprise that the shooter by this morning is being identified as a member of various right-wing kook elements, including the Sovereign Citizens Movement, which is kind of an anti-government movement, not typically associated in terms of overlap with, for instance, the alt-right. They are a different crew, but there is some overlap, and they like to borrow ideas from one another because they're both crazy, and they both love driving other people crazy, so they'll adopt whatever it takes to tweak the normies, as they like to put it. It looks like my laptop is slowing down to a crawl. Perhaps we'll drop dead at some point during the show, but we can limp along with our substitutes. And plenty of that is going to get in the way of some of my reading of reading along with Greg today. But I think it'll clear itself up shortly. The Waffle House shooter, guy's got a name. Don't really care what it is. Also, I guess in the news today, and now here I was going to refer to the name of the heroic young gentleman who actually was able to disarm this guy in the act of his shooting, and that story much shared. But I'm gonna have to find an alternative way of pulling it up this morning so that I can give credit where due. But it was much discussed because, of course, he managed to stop the shooting without resort to a gun of his own, which, as you know, right-wing gun enthusiasts have imagined for some time was impossible or extremely unlikely, and yet it's actually happening more often than disarming or stopping a mass shooter with a gun. The thing to note is, well, one of the things to note, for instance, is that the shooter was white and the guy who disarmed him was black, and so therefore the president has had nothing whatsoever to say about the situation, apparently. And two, well, let's see, we're getting into, crazy lone wolf gunman white guy who has mental health issues, and so therefore something, and it has nothing to do with the gun. And two, of course, it does afford us the opportunity to discuss what we think might have happened had the patron, in fact, been armed. That was the right-wing response initially, was this guy is hero and all, and I don't want to diminish that, but it's too bad he wasn't armed, because it's their contention that he could have saved even more lives had he been armed. But the guy had a lot to say about what he did and why he did it, including the fact that he didn't do it in order to be a hero. He simply did it because he knew that otherwise his life was in danger. He saw an opportunity and he took it, and he was chiefly concerned with getting himself out of there alive and not so much necessarily with saving lives. And let me tell you, that's a pretty good motive as things go. And it turns out that their missions overlapped, and so it worked just fine. But the other thing, not noted enough, I think, initially, but now people are coming around to the realization, the reason that he saw, or the fact that he saw an opportunity to disarm the shooter arose from the fact that the shooting apparently started in the parking lot, and upon entering the restaurant, the shooter had to pause to reload. He didn't have 100-round drums of ammunition attached to his AR-15. I don't know what the capacity of his magazines were, but that had they been larger, and some of the high-capacity magazines, which are the subject of much debate in our gun safety discussions in this country, then he would not have had to pause to reload. It was that pause that gave our hero the opportunity to jump him and swat that rifle to the side and yank it out of his hands and toss it over the counter, whereupon the gunman, who was apparently wearing nothing but a jacket in which he was holding additional magazines, which he didn't get a chance to load, also shed the jacket and took off naked, probably because he was so obsessed with expressing good old-fashioned heartland values there in Antioch, Tennessee. And this tends to happen from time to time. Conservative values drive Americans to show up naked at Waffle House and murder their fellow Americans with the rifles they are able to buy through, well, various strands of magic that have linked this story to some other very interesting discoveries about this guy. Let's open up the mics here for Greg. I'm sure that there's much more to talk about. I know there's more to talk about this subject. This might not be the one that Greg's interested in, or it could be. We'll find out. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. Yeah,
Fully
the fact that he
today?
Was a sovereign citizen is certainly of interest.
Yeah.
And you
more
know,
interesting things,
the other nice thing, nice in scare quotes, is everybody on Twitter advising the fellow who took the gun away.
Yeah.
What he should have done.
Oh, yeah. Huh. Well,
You know, should have tackled him so that he didn't, because the guy got away. You know.
Yes, it's true.
He's still out there somewhere. And of course, we know from reports.
James Shaw Jr., by the way. Finally, my laptop woke up, and that's the name of the guy who did it. And by the way,
Great
you
guy,
did it right.
giving interviews.
You know, I don't care if your motive is saving your own life, quite honestly. That's a good one. Probably your favorite. So,
yeah,
I mean, the extent that other people are helped by it.
He actually
fantastic.
took a bullet in the sense that he was grazed by one. He had a cut on his elbow that had to be attended to at the hospital, minor stuff, bumps and bruises. But given what could have happened, he himself is certainly pretty happy about where he is right now. But this whole sovereign citizen thing is pretty weird, and the fact that the victims who were shot were black and that he was white, I think, is of relevance. You also heard the story that he had been at the White House trying to meet Trump.
Yeah, get a job as a secretary
was arrested for that. I think his guns were taken away, given to his dad, who then returned them to the kid.
Good job, Dad.
We know he didn't have other ammunition or backup clips in his pants pocket because he wasn't wearing pants.
Right, and they're not clips.
Well, he had nothing because he wasn't wearing pants, and he literally had nothing. He had a jacket though, and there was extra ammunition in his jacket pocket. So a very weird situation. Hopefully he's caught soon and given the help he needs, and some of it hopefully from the penal system. You
will note also that when the time comes, we're sure if he's taken alive, we'll get some answers. And
I just want him
to
not shoot anybody else.
Yes, that would be helpful. And
but I got another gun story here.
Okay. I will just add to the mix here. I am seeing that apparently not only was he arrested at the White House at some point, he tried to enter the grounds. He apparently came to thank President Trump for signing the executive order allowing people with mental health issues to get their guns back. So congratulations to him. He got the guns back. And they were returned to the family, and Dad said, President must think it's okay, I guess. This was his thought process, and I'll give them back. And he changed his mind. He didn't want to go to the White House anymore. The Waffle House was where he needed to go, and then the rest
White House,
Waffle
House, what's the difference?
Right. As long as it's a house and the guns are there and President Trump is A-okay with it, he figures he can just maybe shoot some people, and it's all right because the law doesn't apply because I'm a sovereign citizen. Good guy to have with an AR-15.
Right. And so in terms of leadership from the president, I offer this actually very funny column by Jay Bookman.
That worried me. I saw that fly by, and I was like, oh, my God. All right. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Writing under the headline, under the byline, just kidding.
Thank you. I didn't see the headline.
Right there in the middle of Fifth Avenue. What's funny about it is that you, in advance, appreciate the characters he's listing as they comment on this, knowing what you know about them.
All right.
Congressional Republicans and conservative leaders rallied around President Trump Friday, attempting to minimize political damage after Trump shot down a man in the middle of Fifth Avenue in New York City. I'm not going to put myself in the position of having to respond to every presidential shooting, House Speaker Paul Ryan said in a hastily called press conference at the Capitol surrounded by members of his leadership team. I just happen to think it's important to keep our focus where it belongs on enacting a conservative pro-growth agenda that regular Americans care about, like tax cuts for the rich and the repeal of Medicare.
Yay.
Privately, however, at least some Republican members expressed concern about the long-term political impact of such incidents, especially with midterms looming in less than 7 months. Right?
Yep.
So the shooting's fine for Trump. He's not on the ballot this fall, but he's putting the rest of us in a really tough position.
Yes. Right.
How about Bob Corker? Bob Corker, Tennessee, and Jeff Flake of Arizona quickly introduced a resolution warning the president of potential censure should he again pull out a gun and shoot somebody. But they withdrew that measure after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made it clear he would not bring it to a floor vote, calling it divisive and unnecessary. I've been assured by people in the White House that there are no plans to shoot anybody else, at least at this point, McConnell said.
Good. See, that's all you really need to know.
Right? That's where leadership is. The victim, attorney Michael Avenatti, was shot twice in the back as he left the studios of NBC News at Rockefeller Center after an interview. According to doctors at Mount Sinai Beth Israel, Avenatti is expected to recover with no permanent damage to his mouth or other less vital organs. At a regularly scheduled White House press briefing Thursday, spokesperson Sarah Sanders referred all questions about the shooting to the president's private attorneys.
Yeah, that's what I saw fly by, and that's all I saw, with no other context. Oh, my God, somebody shot him.
Right.
Stormy
this
Daniels.
Is the deep state at work undermining our democracy, my friends, Hannity told his audience. This is an unelected part of your government looking to overturn a duly elected president. Don't think this is a coincidence. It's the biggest scandal in American history. Right? According to an overnight Q poll, 68% of Republicans now agree that the shooting never happened. And a similar poll from Rasmussen put the number at 93%. So actually very well done, because they really capture all the elements here in the press and in the typical response to things on D.C. You know, Mitch McConnell is doing the same thing with Mueller legislation, you know, trying to protect Mueller, but he doesn't see any reason for it.
Right, exactly. Can't imagine that anything is going to come up that will change his mind either. I don't know what you're talking about. Protect him from what?
Protect him from, what are you talking about? So here's an interesting piece, which just has some very interesting quotes in it, by Connor Friedersdorf, writing in The Atlantic, trying to make the case that Trump has taken over the GOP, but the GOP has bigger problems than just Trump. And Trump doesn't really run the GOP the way he'd like to think it does, but that doesn't matter. They're still in trouble. But he's got some great quotes from people on the ground here. President Trump's hold on the Republican Party is overstated. That doesn't mean his downfall would resolve their challenges. And he gives examples of everybody says, it's Trump's party. But he says, consider these counterpoints. First, Trump's position is unusually shaky for a first-term president. His influence will take a huge hit if the GOP loses big in the 2018 midterms, and it could suffer if investigations into Trump or his associates expose a significant new scandal. Neither of these outcomes is assured, but both are very plausible. And then the next part I like is him quoting Eric Erickson, who himself is quoting somebody else talking to him, I guess, in some grocery store. And the reason they were in a grocery store is they didn't want to be seen together. Right. Second, if Trump starts to seem like he's hurting the GOP's popularity more than he's helping it, he has no reserve of personal goodwill or substantive support for his ideas on which to fall back. Trump's unpopularity was illustrated most colorfully by an unnamed GOP representative quoted by Eric Erickson. I say a lot of crap on TV defending him. I got to clean this up for the radio here. The legislator said, but honestly, I wish the mofo would just go away. We're going to lose the House, lose the Senate, lose a bunch of states because of him. All his supporters will blame us for what we have or haven't done, and he hasn't led. He wakes up in the morning, craps all over Twitter, craps over us, craps on his staff, and hits golf balls. Screw him. Of course, I can't say that in public or I get run out of town.
Well, you're about to get run out of town
congressman
anyway.
Even declared the president of the president that he has defended on television. That's the fun part. Right? He's one of his staunch supporters on televisions. If we're going to lose because of him, we might as well impeach the mofo.
Yeah, well, I do wonder whether that is like actually a real conversation. Although somebody did propose
from
that
what all the other reporters said, that's exactly what they say behind the scenes that they're afraid to say in public.
Yeah.
They are afraid of Trump's base, but they think that.
Yeah, well, maybe true. I did see someone try to track it down and decided that it might have been Peter King, and I thought he might say that, sure. But I have difficulty believing Eric Erickson about anything.
Right. Friedersdorf goes on to say there's really no heir apparent.
There is no heir apparent here.
To Trumpism, or even a deep stable of future presidential aspirants like the one the Tea Party movement provided the GOP, which isn't to say GOP can separate itself from Trump. The party's embrace of a man so open in his racism, sexism, and xenophobia will be an albatross for a generation. And, the fact of the matter is that because of the Comey memos that the GOP demanded and then got released to their consternation because it didn't really do anything in regard to what they wanted it for. They were trying to smear everybody, and it didn't work. But it just reopened the whole 2016 conversation about what happened and how much of a influence Comey's actions, both Comey 1 and Comey 2, the one just before the election, really had on who won and who didn't win. And what's interesting is with time, because it's 2 years later, when you look back on it, there's a lot of very thoughtful analysts and pundits, who are coming around to Armando's conclusion that really it was all about racism, that what Trump did is unleash, especially in the predominantly white states in the Midwest, a permission structure to go ahead and hate people.
Yes.
And that we're still feeling the after effects of that kind of shockwave, as you pointed out with this Waffle House guy. who I'll not characterize in any other way. But why was he in the White House trying to thank Trump?
Yeah, well, I don't know, and I don't know how he didn't get
travel
very
ban.
far,
What's the
but-
travel ban? Well, that's all about hating Muslims. And what's that all about? Well, Trump gave permission for those sentiments to be mainstreamed. And, if you want an example of what Overton windows are, you're looking at that, which is of major interest because on Wednesday, I guess, is the oral arguments for the Supreme Court in regard to the travel ban, which a lot of people think are going to wind up being upheld simply because the justices didn't want to leave it blocked. They issued, I guess, in legalese, they issued a stay against the block so that it's in effect. And they just hardly ever overturn that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not quite up to speed on the posture in which this comes to the court, but we'll be reviewing it and talking about it, no doubt, a little bit closer to the day of.
Which is in a couple of days, so you got a couple of days to read up. And I'm on Wednesday, so we'll talk about it then. But here's a piece from the Washington Post.
Yes.
In travel ban case, Supreme Court considers the president versus this president.
Yeah.
And basically has the whole issue of, in general, deferring to the president when it comes to issues of national security, but having all those tweets showing animus.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem. And ordinarily, there's a huge amount of deference which is given to the president, but it's usually because the president is also playing things close to the vest, and there's no explicit evidence one way or another, and that's done for a reason. And in the battery of lawyers sent to defend the government position say, we can't really necessarily know his motivations.
But he campaigned on it for a year in open public. He said, I want to ban Muslims.
Right.
And then the government lawyers are saying, don't pay attention to the tweets.
Right.
But the government says tweets are policy. But the lawyers say, don't pay attention to the president, pay attention to the law. It'll make your head spin.
Well, all of these things are normally said in confidence and behind closed doors, and therefore usually covered from any kind of disclosure or consideration under some form of executive privilege or the deliberative process privilege. But one, when it's done during the campaign, you're not the executive. Two, when it's done in public, it's not privileged. And so you really do have a long record of clear declarations about motivation, and so the deference standard doesn't have to apply, certainly not in the same way. Deference is granted when you're not sure and you're looking for a reason to say one way or the other, and you say, well, can't make a decision, so we'll grant that you're doing things correctly. But now you can know
what he's thinking, except when he told you exactly what he's thinking.
Now you can. All these things and all these privileges and all these reasons to ordinarily keep this sort of information out of the public domain and out of the evidence that you consider are gone. So it feels like the deference standard has fallen apart with respect to this president because of actions he's taken. You can absolutely make that decision and still say, for a normal president who understands how to keep his cards close to the vest or her cards close to her vest when that time finally comes, you say the deference standard still exists. We don't have to disrupt it. It doesn't change precedent. It's just if you admit to a crime, I can't help you with respect to the privilege. There's no privilege for open communications and open confessions.
I am not a lawyer and I don't play one on the internets, but, it seems to me there's a big difference between the defense attorney saying, Your Honor, my client didn't mean to shoot that guy on Fifth Avenue. And we can't really know what he's thinking. And the client says, no, actually, I meant to shoot him.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, he needs a different lawyer. I can't defend this guy.
Yeah, well, pretty much. He's made these open declarations. And courts below have found that very clearly. Yeah, this ordinarily would not have gone anywhere but for your big mouth. So you lose. And it's not going to take that much to uphold that decision from below without jeopardizing the necessity for private deliberation and deference to the president later. So I hope they'll see that path through.
We shall see. Hawaii's brief by Washington lawyer Neil K. Ketyal cites not only Trump campaign comments, but also his actions as president, including the time he retweeted 3 anti-Muslim propaganda videos from a widely condemned far-right British organization. This led to a response by the Solicitor General of the United States to the justices of the Supreme Court that could have been written only in this era about this chief executive. Quote, the president's retweets do not address the meaning of the proclamation at all, end quote. Don't pay attention to what he says, just focus on the law, in other words.
Yeah, well, not this time.
Interestingly, Josh Blackman, a professor at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, said only once in the more than a decade Roberts Court have the justices granted a stay without later reversing the opinion of the lower court. In a conference call with reporters, Blackman predicted the same would happen in this case, but he said he made the case for reversing the lower courts in a way it's unlikely the Trump administration itself would endorse. If the court rules here for President Trump, I don't see many lingering problems. I don't know that we'll ever have a president again like Trump who says such awful, awful things on a daily basis. I worry much more if they rule against Trump and they give courts a green light to parse campaign statements and the like. This could potentially hamstring not just this president, but also future presidents. Cases Trump v. Hawaii. And after the break, we'll talk about that a little bit because maybe the imperial presidency does need to be reined in a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. I understand the point he's making here, although I would say it would be, I think courts would find it difficult to parse campaign statements to the as they always have, and would do anything to avoid having to do that. And it's easy to do when your campaign statements are rather more measured than his, and you don't make behind-the-scenes commentary on Twitter about what those statements really, really mean. And very few presidential candidates communicate that directly, that openly with everybody about their motives. So I think that there's an easy distinction to be drawn, but nothing's ever really easy. We'll talk about it more after the break, which is that's the easiest thing we've got. We're going to take it and kick back. There's nothing to do. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us here, so let's continue on with our roundup of weekend news and other tidbits from around the world. Where did we leave off? I've already forgotten. Oh, yes, the Supreme Court. Nothing important.
Yeah, nothing important. That'll be up on Wednesday, and the whole thing about do you decide the case based on what the president wants, or do you decide the case based on what this president wants? Mm-hmm. So I want to go to an article that John Dickerson wrote, which was very interesting, getting a lot of comment, which is the cover article for The Atlantic, How the Presidency Became Impossible, or his headline, The Hardest Job in the World. What if the problem isn't the president, it's the presidency?
Okay, so like imperial presidencies type.
Well, see, here's the thing. Well, he reads a little bit about how difficult this is in an age of polarization. Okay. And I'm going to come back to the Connor Friedersdorf article with some comments that Friedersdorf made at the end of it that we didn't go over yet. We've come to expect, Dickinson writes, that when the national fabric rends, the president will administer needle and thread, or at least reach for the sewing box of unity. After white supremacists marched through Charlottesville, Virginia, shouting, "Jews will not replace us," President Trump's instinct was to emphasize there were good people among the neo-Nazis. And parenthetically, I'll add, that was one of the many reasons I will never forgive Trump for his presidency. And no, he is not like Bush, and he is not like Obama, and he's not like Clinton in regard to, well, people are always partisan.
I wonder if he thought he was helping. I wonder if he thought he was reaching for the sewing box. Oh, well, there's good people among both sides. But obviously totally wrong in this situation. But I wonder if he thought at any point that is healing.
I want the sovereign citizens to feel like they have a place in this country.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dickinson goes on, we expect presidents to be deal makers, even when the opposition is calcified. They're supposed to drink and dine with the other side and find a bipartisan solution. And that was always the expectation for Obama.
Beer summit.
Trump promised that his decades in the real estate business would make him an especially able negotiator. But on health care, taxes, and immigration, he hasn't much bothered to trade horses with Democratic lawmakers. And they cite Joe Manchin, for example, that they don't even talk to. To his critics, Trump's detours from the expectations of his office prove he's unfit to inhabit it, or they demonstrate his hypocrisy. The man who now ignores the traditional responsibilities of the job was once perhaps the nation's foremost presidential scold, regularly criticizing his predecessors when they responded to a disaster inadequately or played too much golf or couldn't make a deal. Okay. Trump even suggested that Barack Obama's manner of descending the stairs of Air Force One was unpresidential. Pretty funny from a guy who's afraid of stairs.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting part. Members of MAGA Nation scoff at the president detractors and bask in the glow of the burning norms. Why should Trump throw all his energy and political capital in producing quick results in Puerto Rico when the island's poor planning and weak infrastructure made success impossible? And besides, they're in debt and the place is a hellhole, and so why do we even bother?
It's full of Puerto Ricans.
Good money after bed, he says. Mm-hmm. Why should we bow before Democrats who will never work with him anyway? Can you imagine? Democrats don't want to work with a guy who thinks there's good people on the neo-Nazi side. Trump's backers see him as a new kind of president, unburdened by political correctness and unconstrained by the old rules of Beltway deal-making. In other words, they don't mind that he's a racist.
Right.
He doesn't let niceties get in the way of taking care of business. The intensity of public feelings about Trump makes it hard to measure him against the presidency, as breaks with the tradition are so jarring, and the murmuration of tweets so thick that debate about his behavior tends to be conducted on the plane of propriety, and the president's seeming disregard for it. If he were a less divisive figure, we might view these lapses differently. We might consider that what looks like incompetence or impertinence on the part of the office holder could also be evidence that the office itself is broken. And then they talk about what responsibilities the president has and how difficult the job it is, and they go into that. Now, Connor Friedersdorf had observed that one of the things that knits the diffuse Republican Party together, remember, this is a party that is run by
lunatics?
No, by celebrities.
Celebrities, okay.
And media figures. I mean, how many years have we said this? Who are the leaders of the Republican Party? It's Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, in an earlier era, Glenn Beck. And what knits them together? How do they get the ability to defend such diverse figures coming from such different places as George W. Bush and Donald Trump and H.W. I mean, they're so different. Or Ronald Reagan, or whatever you want to do. All of those guys are just so different. How can they maintain the illusion of consistency in terms of the Democrats are bad and Republicans are good, and it doesn't matter what Republican, just take one out and put another in who's the exact opposite and we'll still say the same thing? How do they do that? And the answer is that the defining factor about being a Republican and a conservative these days is triggering the libtard snowflakes.
Well, yeah, I guess that's it. It was more, I guess, a different aspect of it, more genteelly but still poorly put as the Etch-a-Sketch by Mitt Romney. But yeah, getting right down to it, it doesn't matter. You don't need to erase anything.
Freeze said that, right? And actually, he might run himself for some position, I hear.
Sure, but why not? I got
same
a
guy who
position
said that the best birth control is to put an aspirin between your knees and keep your legs closed.
That's
that
the
guy?
position I'd like you to see you in.
In any case, but the whole idea here is that one of the reasons that the Trump supporters are just so into what he does is because it doesn't matter what he does.
Right.
They could care less about what he does. Actually, he's doing a lot of things that are going to hurt them, and slowly but surely they're coming to the conclusion that may not be a good thing. You know, they're like the farmers who might be soybean farmers or maybe pork farmers, and realizing the tariffs aren't all they're cracked up to be in terms of like losing the farm and stuff like that. Yeah. But the important thing is that he triggers the snowflakes.
Right. Shooting myself in the foot to trigger the libs. Well, okay. because they love gun control. All right. I mean, sorry about your feet, but I guess.
Now, it's always been my contention that that's the majority of the Republican Party and it's the majority of conservatives, but it's not every conservative. That's the whole point about, peeling off 10% who just shake their head and say, I don't know if that's such a good idea, because the elections are so close these days for structural reasons that 10% one way or the other makes a big difference. Yeah. We don't do landslides anymore. Oh. You don't do 65-35% wins, even though you feel like you should. But there's a lot of people making the case, again, in the aftermath of the Comey memos and bringing 2016 up again, trying to make the case that actually Clinton did okay. It wasn't a terrible campaign like everybody else said. It wasn't any worse than what John Kerry did, or it wasn't any worse than what any other generic Democrat would have done. Maybe a Joe Biden might have done better. Maybe a Bernie might have done better, doubtful, for reasons that include he couldn't even win the primaries. But the point is that there are structural reasons for why the elections are the way they are. The fundamentals, without personality, taking out who was running, predicted a slight Republican win in 2016. You had incumbent presidency for 2 terms, and that's always tough. And a George H.W. Bush winning a so-called Reagan third term is not the norm, it's the exception. So against those headwinds, plus the headwinds of a very hostile press, plus the headwinds of Comey's intervention, and add on the fact that Trump basically galvanized white resentment in a way that was actually rather remarkable. And Friedersdorf, I think, also has a nice a summary of how good Trump was at that. That's his superpower, is channeling white resentment. It was a difficult election for anybody to win, let alone Clinton. So you step back and say, but, if you get the job, then how do you govern? Obama had his issues. It was very difficult working with a very partisan Republican House, where whether it was under Boehner or under Paul Ryan, who perhaps is more sympathetic, the Freedom Caucus would not allow anything to get done. And the vagaries of trying to protect that Republican majority in re-election made it nearly impossible for the speaker to break the so-called Hastert rule, which isn't a rule, and start working with Democrats across the aisle when there were enough votes to pass stuff. So, because that doesn't trigger the snowflakes, and therefore how does that help you get elected just because you got stuff done? Mm. Nobody votes on policy.
That would be foolish. Who could possibly care about that?
Right. So, it's just the interesting long thought, stepping back and looking at this whole picture in terms of, well, what's a president supposed to do? And then what's this president supposed to do? And how do people look at the presidency versus this presidency? That's not just a problem for John Dickerson. It's a problem for the Supreme Court right now in terms of evaluating the travel bans. And it's a problem for all of us in terms of deciding, how much of what Trump does is because he himself is a remarkably difficult figure, or as Jared Yates Sexton put it on Twitter, the president of the United States has no ethics, has the worst possible worldview, and is probably compromised by a foreign adversary. And if that weren't enough, he's an idiot. But, that's in a nutshell why Trump is unqualified to be president. But any Republican in that situation would probably be having a very, very difficult time. I mean, it's just easy to see Mike Pence in that situation, also making people unhappy. Just not quite the depth of Trump, because Trump, frankly, is very good at triggering snowflakes. It's what he does. It's what he lives for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he triggers everybody because people who like competent government or stability in our country, or people who aren't dopes being in charge of things, that's, it's triggering not so much on a policy level as it is, like, I have difficulty getting my kids to do my homework because they're like, I don't know, the president's a moron. Why can't I be a moron? I wish you, because you'll upset me, but other than that, I can't tell you that, working hard and studying is going to help you be president. I hope that's not on your agenda, but What can I tell you? The most powerful guy in the world is a stone moron, and I can't point to anything right now. You're too young to remember what it was like when smart people were respected.
So here's a sidelight of that, and you see it in terms of who's running for Congress. This is a piece from Vox called "Inexperienced Candidates Are Becoming More Common, but Only in One Party."
Ah, yes. Now, first, what is a candidate? Thank you, Vox. Tell us.
Well, a Vox planner candidate is somebody who's running for office.
Excellent. Office.
Let's go to Schoolhouse Rock here and look it up. Okay. Republicans are electing more inexperienced candidates than they used to, and more than Democrats.
Okay. It's 1996, everybody. Welcome.
What if I told you that the pilot for your next flight never landed a plane before, that the lifeguard watching your child in the pool doesn't know how to swim? Choosing someone without experience over somebody with experience to perform a task can have serious consequences. Yet the American electorate is increasingly infatuated with inexperienced candidates for political office. And the chart shows that actually that's almost entirely on the Republican side.
Okay, well, that's a good chart.
So.
They're right about that. And if you told me that about my lifeguard, I would call Uber for lifeguards. That's all.
Right. I mean, why don't we just send people to Congress who don't know what they're doing? Or we could send people to Congress who have some idea of how process works. Not that they would need it in their job or anything.
No. Well, their staff will tell them what to
what if we send staff who doesn't know?
Then, good. I don't know. Sovereign citizens. Why not send them?
Right.
Not only do they not know, they don't care.
Although the first graph makes it clear the Democratic voters and Republican voters are evaluating their candidates differently, we need to dig a bit deeper to assess what types of inexperienced candidates Republican voters prefer. In the second graph, we break down the inexperienced candidates into groups we call preferred amateurs and true amateurs. Preferred amateurs are those candidates who, despite not having experience in elected office, are somehow connected to the law and government. This classification includes lawyers, non-elected government positions such as an aide, a local party leader, or appointed judge, or you might even throw an ex-staffer. Mm-hmm. The figure shows that for the years 2010 to 2016, successful Republican amateur candidates are not what we would classify as preferred amateurs, but rather true amateurs. No government experience whatsoever. Most of the successful amateur candidates are those with a military background, business professionals, or another category altogether that we classify as no noteworthy experience.
Reindeer farmer.
Occupations of candidates in this category include a PhD in clinical psychology and a radio talk show host.
Oh, okay. But the PhD sounds good.
Yeah, look, he's a doctor, right? Well, what's that got to do with running government? Well, but he's a doctor, right? So that's actually no.
Right. Sebastian Gorka.
Well, there's a weird character altogether. So Democrats on occasion do this. They flirt with it. Cynthia Nixon, arguably running against Andrew Cuomo, doesn't have a lot of government experience.
True.
She was actually an actress on Sex and the City, so I don't know if that counts.
Governing.
But the parties don't embrace figures like that, whereas on the Republican side, parties do embrace them.
Yes.
And so then you get people in Congress who are perfectly open because they don't have enough experience to fight it of being candidates in a box because they don't know any better.
Yes.
So they tend to either do what they're told because the speaker says so in the House, or they do what they're told because the head of the Freedom Caucus says so in the House.
Right. And they think that means it's worth money to do those things.
Yeah. So, it's just, again, and having elected Trump as president is a sort of permission structure to say, okay, well, if he can do it, anybody can do it. Which is, by the way, not a good thing because he's not doing a very good job.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's, I think, at its heart, very different reason for the generic candidates to run in the parties. One party tends to be populated by people who say, well, I don't know anything about this, but everybody hates this thing anyway, so the less I know about it, the better. And when I get there, someone will tell me what to do. Whereas Democrats, I think, typically approach things like, I may not know anything about how this runs, but that's embarrassing to me, and I'm going to be upset with myself when I get there, not knowing what's going on. And I either won't run if I don't think I can get up to speed, or I will, and then I'll dive into my studies. And Republicans just think, I don't know, whatever it takes to continue to get that paycheck is enough for me. I don't want to get a real job.
So I'll finish with Connor Friedersdorf's observations at the end of his piece here. He says, the good news for Republicans as Trump fails in office due to his personal corruption, lack of discipline, alienating bigotry, and an alarming erratic personality is that his ostensible takeover of the Republican Party is much exaggerated. Its politicians and voters may soon dispense with him and deny even to themselves how much they once supported him, just as bygone populists did with George W. Bush, the invasion of Iraq, and Glenn Beck's rantings. You know, they're sitting there on the ash heap of history, I suppose. A new iteration of right-wing populist resentment will follow. Limbaugh will support it too, no matter how ideologically incompatible it is with Trumpism. Just watch. And that brings us to the bad news for the Republican Party. Dumping Trump won't actually get rid of the pathology that made his rise to president possible. Republicans will remain vulnerable to takeover by charismatic hucksters without a substantially constructive policy agenda, an ability to successfully govern, or a vision for a coalition that transcends the resentment, and the populist entertainers will keep getting filthy rich. It's they who've come closer to taking over the GOP. So I think those are all good points to consider. And you actually have Vinny from the Bronx, first-time, long-time call-in, who's actually running the place.
Yes. Well, that's I guess that's what they're geared for. I take his point. I don't know if that really means that anybody in particular has taken over the Republican Party, but that it's going to be a succession of people who just hate government from different angles. And
hate people who try to make it worse.
Right. And anybody who tries to make it work or make it worse, I guess, hate anybody that isn't themselves, essentially. And it'll be easy for Rush Limbaugh to adapt from one to the next because all that matters is that they make good copy. He doesn't care about running the government well either, just needs something to either revel in, to trigger the libs, or complain about, to trigger the libs for that matter, or whatever. And he's just, it doesn't seem to me like it necessarily argues that Trump hasn't taken over the party. It's just whoever happens to take over gets to take over for the term of office that they hold, and then they'll be forgotten later on and swapped out for whoever the next is providing the next box for the candidates, I guess. Yeah, but I guess it's not a permanent Trumpian takeover, true, but it is a permanent condition of the Republicans that they don't particularly care for any sort of ideological continuity as between presidencies. So all right.
There you have it. So that's my offerings for today. A little bit amusing about the state of the presidency, as this particular president, more and more openly, from Joe Scarborough to political pundits on TV, and people are more and more willing to say, you know what, his presidency really does seem like it's failing. So let's watch that slow motion train wreck, and we'll see what. It was a relatively quiet news weekend from the Mueller front and that sort of thing. We'll see what happens this week. Take care. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend Kagro in the morning, David Waldman, who'll make sense of all of that now that I've given him some material. That's your job for the next hour and some minutes. And I'll talk to you on Wednesday and see what kind of a job you did.
Excellent. We'll head now into our hour and 10-minute break rather than trying to make sense of all that. Thanks, Greg. All right. We'll have to take that on at some level anyway. I don't know. I guess I take bits and pieces away from Connor Friedersdorf's piece there, some of which I'll agree with and some of which I will agree to view differently at the very least. So just to double back on the stories we started out with, yes, it's being reported by a number of outlets and all rounded up by Laura Clausen on our front page over at Daily Kos. Waffle House suspects, guns seized after White House incident, but his father returned them. Just to give you some sources on that, I don't know, I guess they still call him the suspect there at the Waffle House shooting. 4 people killed in Tennessee on this in this particular attack. Still at large, having fled his apartment in black pants. He went back to get some pants. That's good, I guess. And possibly armed. I suppose it stands to reason if he's going to run back to the house and pick up some pants, he very likely stuffed some armaments in the pockets. That means kids, of course, will be going back to school on Monday morning with a murderer possibly on the loose in the area. Usually call for a lockdown in that situation. But gee whiz, we can't call our whole society to a halt just because maniacs are running around killing people on the streets, can we? Of course, one might wonder whether it's society we're calling to a halt anyway, if that's the case. But that's a larger question than we're prepared to address at this moment. Yes, so the backstory on this particular wacko murderer, Laura says, shows just how messed up American gun culture is. I demand you respect it, nonetheless, but it is rather messed up. And once again, it gives us the opportunity to remind people who puff themselves up with the notion of defending gun culture, like it was David French last time around, I think. Own it. This is gun culture. Showing up naked at Waffle House at 3 o'clock in the morning and shooting the place up and murdering people in the parking lot with an AR-15 and then shedding your last remaining clothes before running off naked into the night in Antioch, Tennessee. Not only is that gun culture, that's heartland values, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reality of what happens with guns, and you got to own it. Sorry, for those of you who are into like cleaning your weapons with Swiss timing precision and swearing on a stack of Bibles that you're only going to be responsible. You're in the vast minority of what goes on for real out there with the guns. So let's see. Here's the backstory. The AR-15 rifle used in the Waffle House killings had previously been seized by authorities. That is to say, the cops had it in their hands at some point, could have prevented it from getting into the hands of the shooter by simply saying, no, you're too crazy because we just caught you trying to break into the White House. Sorry, no guns for you. But in this country, well, he didn't make it all the way into the White House, and he promises never to do it again. Besides, what are we going to do if ISIS breaks into his house while we're waiting to see whether he has become mentally stable again or not? He's going to be left without any mechanism at all to fight off the foreign invaders, so it must be time to give his guns back. This guy apparently trying to break into the White House, it says here, trying to meet President Trump, which he still may yet have an opportunity to do, when he attempted to cross a security barrier at the White House complex in July of last year, federal authorities said. But you know how those FBI guys are such liars, so can you take them at their word? After an investigation by the FBI office in Springfield, Illinois, near where this guy lived at the time, state and local officials confiscated his guns and revoked his firearm license, which is not a terribly complicated thing to get done, I don't think, in Illinois. Illinois sort of bringing up the rear in terms of state licensing, one of the last holdouts because of the level of gun violence in Chicago being fed by nearby gun markets, of course, but they did try to keep a lid on the trend toward looser gun laws there in Illinois for some time, but they've been steamrollered by the gun lobby. Anyway, yeah, so now they do have a must-issue policy for concealed carry and other gun licenses there. So, but they did retain some mechanisms for taking those licenses back away if you do something crazy, like try to break into the White House to meet President Trump, or any other reason for breaking in. If you're breaking in to see if you can get some of that ice cream, well, that's just ridiculous. You're not going to get any of that. That's how we know you're nuts. So they may not know where our suspect is, but his father, Laura says, could be and should be arrested right now, to say nothing of being sued for every damn thing he owns, if there is anything, leaving him as naked as his son. Wow, Laura's mad. As when he was fleeing the scene of his murders by the victims and their families. Also of note, Nashville Mayor David Briley, a Democrat, seized on the moment to renew calls for stricter gun laws. He says, for a moment, let's be honest about what happened. Last night, innocent Nashvillians, it looks like Nashvillans, but it's Villians, I guess, because you don't want to portray them as villains just because they live there in Nashville, were terrorized by a man with an AR-15. Let's be honest, some people see these weapons as having a purpose of terrorizing other people. Yeah, most do, including the people who own them and defend having them. Oh, no, freedom, yada, yada. Yeah, but freedom through terrorizing others. Well, sure, that is freedom for me. It's happening too much, Briley said. And, he's also quoted in, who's got this story? I have it open here, of course, from the Hill. So I don't know whether they got their comments directly or not, but he did note that it has been only 7 months since the last mass shooting in Nashville. And can you even bring it to mind? It doesn't instantly occur to me what that mass shooting in Nashville was, because of course it's all lost in the mix. Anyway, that's the reality of it. Guy tries to break into the White House. As I saw earlier, and I think, let's see if I can't pick up on where that piece came from. He had tried to enter the White House to thank the president for allowing people with mental health issues to get their guns back more quickly. So he had an agenda, and he was sticking to it. In addition, apparently, raw story, rounding up news from USA Today saying that also a member of the Sovereign Citizens Movement. How interesting. Why he would even see the president as a legitimate part of the policy which awarded him his guns back, I'm not sure. But then again, that would be, that would call for consistent thinking. One, by a sympathizer of the Sovereign Citizens Movement, and two, a guy with very obvious mental problems. So I guess you shouldn't be surprised that it doesn't make any particular sense. Not going to solve that problem anytime soon, even though I'm about to take a break for a minute to gather thoughts and find a direction for the second half of the show. There's never going to be any explaining what was going on in this guy's head. We'll only hope that we're able to explain what's going on in the heads of the people actually running the country. We'll see. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Cutting things off here as we take just a short break at the top of the hour. Direction? Anyone? Let's see. There's so much we could be exploring. I also wondered whether perhaps we ought to schedule some time. Maybe tomorrow is a better day, unless he's free to fill in today. But perhaps Armando, I thought, might have some thoughts about a subject I have not yet caught up on and am reluctant to spend a great deal of time catching up on. But if you already know what's going on, let me know. The filing of a lawsuit by the Democratic National Committee against who exactly? Well, I've got a Washington Post article that explains it, and maybe I'll come to grasp this thing. I kind of turned away from it over the weekend, worried that, I don't know. Is this a suit you can actually file? Is this some sort of a stunt? I didn't want to dismiss it that way off the bat. And I did see an interesting tweet go by right about the same time, because I think everybody thought, that this is something that sounds a little iffy. And so people were speaking up at the time. Joan Walsh, I noticed, tweeting almost immediately about it, that we should note that the 1972 Democratic National Committee lawsuit against the Nixon campaign was successful. Nixon's folks, as she puts it here, paid $750,000 on the day he resigned. The Washington Post story about the current suit, and I guess that's supposed to give us some hope that there's a substantive issue behind the lawsuit. Armando says he can certainly discuss it in broad strokes, and perhaps that's all we can give it at the moment. Let's start out with reading the Washington Post coverage of the story on Friday, along with Armando, and see if we can't figure out how much, how much weight to give this thing just yet. But hey, Armando, how you doing?
Hey, am I sounding okay?
Yes, well, relatively.
Good.
Why? Have you got nose clips on or something? It's breathing in helium? Anything we should know about? You just think your connection is no good?
No. Now it's better.
Okay.
You were reverbing a little bit on.
Oh, okay. Well, you sound
so
fine.
I thought it would probably be the same way going back.
I see. Okay, no
I can give you a first blush.
All right.
Scanned it. Look, at the end of the day, it's a stunt. I mean, of course it's a stunt, but stunt doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, the DNC's not in this case for the money.
Well,
Let's
that's
put it
true.
that way.
Okay, well, that's easy to believe.
Okay. So in that sense, it's trying to highlight something. It's trying to do it.
Yes. Now I don't hear you. He's trying to do what?
It seems to me. I'm going to call you back because I think my connection's bad. Let me call you right back.
Certainly. Okay, and I'll tell you what. I'll begin on reading through the Washington Post background on it. Tom Hamburger, Rosalind Helderman, Ellen Nakashima on the byline here from this Friday piece. The DNC filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit on Friday. So, again, it's not about the money, but as long as you're suing, you might as well make it a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Why not? And a multi-million-dollar lawsuit Friday against the Russian government, the Trump campaign, and the WikiLeaks organization, alleging a far-reaching conspiracy to disrupt the 2016 campaign and tilt the election to Donald Trump. Interesting collection of defendants, and I guess if you're alleging that there really was that kind of collusion, then those would be your defendants, and so I guess that's not to be, you shouldn't consider that unexpected. I don't know how much success you have suing the Russian government per se in terms of collection, but there's where Armando was saying it's not really about the money per se. It's not about the necessity or hope of actually collecting money, but rather of naming defendants and saying, we think you did this thing. Now, if we can also find you liable and have somebody enforce it, well, then so much the better. Great. Give us many millions of dollars. But that doesn't seem to be the issue here. The complaint filed in federal district court in Manhattan alleges that top Trump campaign officials conspired with the Russian government, and its military spy agency to hurt Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton and help Trump by hacking the computer networks of the Democratic Party and disseminating stolen material found there. Very basic, certainly at the heart of most of what is alleged in the Trump-Russia investigation. And so, I guess on the one hand, why not? And on the other hand, okay, is that something courts really handle for us? And open question about everything now, of course. Why not?
It actually has a larger global comment, not advertently, but I think on the RICO statute, and people may not remember it because it's really sort of died out in all forums. It really isn't used that much for criminal cases or civil cases. RICO is a Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption or Corrupt Organization Act, was passed, I believe, in the late 60s. To give the government a new tool to get at organized crime.
Yeah.
It contains a civil remedy with some pretty severe penalties. If you could successfully prosecute one, you get treble damages and attorney's fees. The Supreme Court and courts below it have legislated it, and I said use legislatively on purpose here because they changed the statute. Because they didn't like it, because people were bringing too many RICO suits. Every case became a RICO suit, but Congress didn't change it. What Gorsuch says, Congress should write better laws, as he likes to say when he strikes down laws as for whatever reason strikes them.
Okay.
Both the antitrust law and the RICO law have been rewritten by the courts. Maybe in good ways, maybe in bad ways. We can argue about that, but they have been rewritten. RICO was rewritten to impose new requirements like what it takes to properly plead a pattern of racketeering activity, which becomes a key fact in this case if they're going to, really pursue RICO here. Anyway, to get back to the lawsuit, the criminal enterprise at center of all this is the Trump campaign.
Yes.
Literally the entity Trump for America, or whatever the hell they called it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I forgot.
Is alleged to be the criminal enterprise.
The hub.
And the participants in the enterprise were the Russian government, the people running it, and WikiLeaks and the other individuals involved. One of the things that some people have highlighted, The Intercept did, Trevor Tim, who I think is just misguided here, says, oh, this allegation against WikiLeaks is a threat to the freedom of the press. Narrator, it's not. Because
okay.
What is required to find WikiLeaks liable here would be participation in a conspiracy to do this. I mean, the mere publication isn't going to be enough. It's going to require active participation in the conspiracy, the alleged conspiracy. So that's a silly argument. But anyway, let me let you back to what you were saying.
Oh, well, I was going to read a little bit through the basics of it in the Washington Post piece, and, we'll comment along the way. That's the value added here. You can read this in the paper. You probably already did. What you didn't do is read it with me and Armando and have us interrupted every 5 minutes and say, by the way, this reminds me of what I had breakfast
exactly. Today. Let me tell you what this really means.
But, yeah. And I guess I'll overlay this with... I'm not 100% sure I'm still not 100% sure how involved the Russian government is in all of this, but only because I have such a difficult time defining what the Russian government is. It isn't what it used to be. It isn't what we used to conceive of our government being, although I think the two are meeting a little bit in the middle because we're moving toward the Russian model so quickly in our own government. But
well, I think the theory is that the Russian government directed actors,
yes,
to act on its behalf in this conspiracy.
My confusion arises from the fact that it is often unclear who constitutes the Russian government, or whether certain actors who are preferred partners of Vladimir Putin qualify as government actors. Whether they hold official title or not. I mean, being an oligarch.
As a legal matter, if the Russian government, Putin, is directing them on how to behave, that would be attributable to the Russian government.
All right. Well,
the idea.
Right. And of course, they would have money that you could ordinarily you could seize on. Although whether or not they would agree to make payments, that's one thing. But you could certainly use sanctions.
Here's a related concept in a case that's a little more straightforward.
Okay.
Was Michael Cohen an agent for Donald Trump when he did the Stormy Daniels deal?
Well, he says
think of it that way. Is Oleg Deripaska?
Yeah.
I'm just picking a name. I'm not sure he's involved in this. Was he acting at the behest of Putin?
Yeah, and that's
was he directed to act in this way by the Russian government?
It's right. It's difficult to know for sure, but certainly if the circumstantial evidence is such that Putin benefits enormously from it, or even that the Russian government as an entity benefits enormously from it, it's easier to make that assumption. It's just what constitutes governance in Russia is very different from what we understand to constitute governance, although, like I say, we are moving more quickly towards their model. Still.
Well, no qualified immunity for Russian government officials in the United States court.
Okay.
There is sovereign immunity, though.
All right. Which
is another issue.
We may yet run into that. The complaint, though, filed in Federal District Court in Manhattan, which used to be sort of the RICO capital. So,
yes, it was.
Alleges that top Trump campaign officials conspired with the Russian government and its military spy agency to hurt Democratic presidential nominee Clinton, helped Trump by hacking the computer networks of the Democratic Party, disseminating the stolen information found there. During the 2016 campaign, Russia launched an all-out assault on our democracy, and it found a willing and active partner in Donald Trump's campaign, DNC Chairman Tom Perez said in a statement. This constituted an act of unprecedented treachery. The campaign of a nominee for president of the United States in league with a hostile foreign power to bolster its own chance to win the presidency, he said. The suit asserts that the Russian hacking campaign, combined with Trump associates' contacts with Russia and the campaign's public cheerleading of the hacks, and that's undisputed, amounted to an illegal conspiracy to interfere in the election and caused serious damage to the Democratic Party. So that's the basis of the suit. Again, my questions are mostly about, all right, I don't have evidence in front of me that makes me say Donald Trump at some point said, you know who would be really helpful in all this? The Russian government. Let's talk to them and see if we can't work this out, as opposed to he's used to having, in his mind, what is his success in business, to the degree that he has had it, he's used to it coming with the aid of people who happen to be Russian, some of whom were in fact connected with the government, but he was primarily concerned with the question of whether or not they had money to give him and didn't care whether they were Russian in nationality or connected to the Russian government at all. He just wanted their money. And when Russian oligarchs, some of whom may not have been involved directly with the day-to-day governance of Russia, found that to be true, they shared that information as good business information with their friends, some of whom were connected to the Russian government. And if at any point they stopped and pondered, well, will Donald Trump be willing to play ball with us if we are, in fact, directly connected to the government? The answer was he's either too dumb to notice, or he doesn't care, or he may even actively just be interested in helping whoever's got money, and it doesn't really matter to him. It may never occur to him that some of the Russians that he deal with may, in fact, be government agents as well, just so long as they're giving him money. So when he says there was no collusion with the Russian government, I believe that it's possible that in his mind he never thought he was colluding with the Russian government, though he probably was, because to him it's just rich Russians. But in Russia, that sometimes can mean you're in the government. It can sometimes mean you're acting at the behest of the government. It can sometimes mean you're a government minister whose riches are stolen. He doesn't care, and it never bothered him, because in private life it didn't make any difference whether he was using stolen Russian sovereign funds or stolen Russian mobster funds. It makes no difference to him. So I think that there's a possibility that Trump thinks, I never agreed to do anything with the Russian government, but he can't tell what the Russian government is or isn't and doesn't care anyway. That's my theory overlaying all of this. It may or may not create problems for this lawsuit. Continuing with the Post's coverage here, though, Senate investigators and prosecutors for Robert Mueller, of course, still looking into whether Trump associates coordinated with any Russian efforts. Last month, Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee said they found no evidence that Trump and his affiliates colluded with Russian officials, whatever that even means, by which I mean I can't define either Russian officials or collusion, to sway the election, or that the Kremlin sought to help Trump, a conclusion rejected by the panel's Democrats. In a statement, Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale, he's the new one for the next time around, said the Democrats' lawsuit is without merit and likely to be dismissed. His basis for saying that, he would like that to be the case. He's not a lawyer, and he doesn't want to be on the hook for anything. And he wants to remain...
I could say it's going to be dismissed or won't be.
Well, that's true, too.
Wait till the motions are filed. And,
I guess.
The DNC has a free amendment, and even if it's dismissed once, it'll probably be without prejudice, and they'll give another crack at it. Right now, you're at the pleading stage. Forget about the proof stage. And here I'll put a little law school stuff that
all right.
people may or may not remember. How does a case start? You file a complaint. What is a complaint? Well, in federal court, as opposed to some state courts, it's really just called notice pleading. Notice is, this is Federal Rule Civil Procedure 8, a short and concise statement of the facts that support your claims. Well, this is about 35 pages, so it's neither short nor concise, and unfortunately they're not. And the reason they're not is the Supreme Court, again, changed the rules. And understand the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure are actually a law. They're passed by the Congress.
Yes, although I'm a little more comfortable with their changing those.
Yes, because at least they're court rules. We all feel a little better or less uncomfortable with courts rewriting laws because it's about court rules. And the Federal Rules, there was a case from 1958 that basically said if there's any plausible way that whatever's not even plausible, any way of reading the facts that are alleged in a complaint that state a claim, then you don't dismiss the complaint. It was very hard to get complaints dismissed, and that was until two sets of cases came up. One was involved in the antitrust area. Well, actually, that's not. Let me leave the antitrust thing for summary judgment. But the case in terms of pleading really changed with two cases. You've probably heard of them if you're a lawyer, even if you don't litigate. They're called Twombly and Iqbal. Those are two different cases. They're both Supreme Court cases. Twombly was a case that said you can dismiss a case if what you're pleading does not state a plausible claim.
Yes.
Plausible. And it was actually the worst decision ever rendered by Justice David Souter. Stevens in dissent was very eloquent and correct. But nonetheless, the rest lawyers in America in federal court are deal with Twombly now and Iqbal. And ironically, it's created unnecessary motion practice, because now there's a lot of almost every time now in anything that's somewhat complex, particularly in the antitrust field. Twombly was an antitrust case. Iqbal was actually a civil rights violation case.
Iqbal, IQBAL.
IQBAL.
Yeah. So,
and now we
Twombly
have
and
to
Iqbal,
go
by
through,
the
well,
way.
I get what you're saying, but what you're saying isn't plausible.
Yeah.
I don't believe it could be true. I mean, what kind of standard is that?
I don't know.
That's where we live. And in fact, Souter tried to back out of it. Interestingly, not too many people know this unless you've been in the First Circuit practice, which I do on occasion. He sat by designation after he retired from the Supreme Court. He sat by designation on a First Circuit panel. He said, all those things people are saying about Twombly, that's not what I meant. And he wrote this whole long opinion about why everyone's wrong about what he meant by Twombly. But it's too late now, Souter. You should have thought of that in the first place. Anyway, so you go through this. There's going to be a motion to dismiss. Does it state a plausible claim? And each individual defendant will argue it's not plausible as to me. Like WikiLeaks will probably have good arguments for dismissal, because there's going to be very little evidence or even allegations, I would argue, that you can make in good faith that WikiLeaks was on the front end in this conspiracy. They were clearly handed information, these emails, by the people involved in it, the Russian government at the very least, to the degree that we think you can prove the Trump campaign was involved in it. You can do that, whoever it was. But it's going to be hard to say that Assange and WikiLeaks, I believe, were in the front and the first step of this conspiracy, or even joined it, other than being eager to be the publisher. And that's going to be a hard sell. So I think WikiLeaks would have a successful motion to dismiss. The rest of them, who knows?
But
anyway, we're putting the cart before the horse.
Yes,
let people make their motions, and then let's see what happens.
True. And of course, the job of anybody working in Republican politics at this point is to conjecture that, it's all nonsense and it'll be dismissed. They may be right, they may be wrong, but that's the job, so I wouldn't pay too much attention to it when they say that. As you were finishing up there, it occurred to me that I guess under the old, more expansive RICO thinking, I would say, WikiLeaks at some point and Assange at some point come out and try to throw the dogs off the scent by swearing on a stack of whatever Julian Assange swears on, that Russia and Russians were not the source of the emails that they received. And under traditional, I guess, RICO practice, you usually say, well, that's an act in furtherance of the conspiracy right there.
Yes, that would be the phraseology.
So,
but that runs into the First Amendment, and there's your problem there. You have to cabin what you can argue in RICO with the First Amendment. And publication is a protected First Amendment right. I think you'd really have to prove, in my view, that WikiLeaks was in on it from the beginning.
Yeah. All right. Well, it may be difficult for them, and I suppose at this point you throw them in there and at this point you make WikiLeaks spend money wherever they might have it.
I question that strategy. I'll tell you why. It's a political matter. Mm-hmm. WikiLeaks is going to fundraise off this.
Oh, well, that's
if
true.
they even come to court, which they might not, because where is WikiLeaks exactly? How do you serve WikiLeaks?
Go get them. I don't know. Ecuadorian embassy, maybe not. I have no idea. Email.
I don't know. Would that be good service? I mean, there's something called the Hague Convention, which is how you serve people in other countries for all signatories. The United Kingdom is a signatory of the Hague Convention.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go get a process server? You do what you're supposed to do. I don't know what the rules are in the UK, but I'm sure there are good rules that can be followed. And you knock on the door at the Ecuadorian embassy and said, "I'm here to see Mr. Assange."
Right. You can
and they
send,
say, "Well, we're not going to let you see him." Then what?
Send the process servers from the distinguished. Sounded like an English or a British insurance company or private detective agency, Twombly and Iqbal.
Exactly. But, I'll go even further. What is WikiLeaks? Is it an organized entity? Is there a corporation behind this? Is there,
no
or
idea.
did they go the LLC route to take advantage of the new tax laws? I actually don't know what being WikiLeaks means. Does it mean anything? I don't know.
I think that's why it's listed here as I laughed a little bit just to myself when they called it the WikiLeaks organization, which is like the Trump organization. What is it? I don't know. It's an entity, and it may have a direction. What is the
Trump organization? You made that's a great question. Is it the parent company of all these LLCs?
I imagine it's handled that way, and certainly Donald Trump imagines it to be that. I don't know whether it was really structured that way. If Michael Cohen was a smarter guy, I would say there was some. Although he doesn't handle that. It's what's his name?
Alan Gardner.
Yeah,
the real lawyer at the Trump organization is a fellow named Alan Gardner.
And he likely would have structured it such that either it's not formally the parent company of all these various LLCs, or clearly Donald Trump would be retaining control in all these things, but he would somehow structure it.
Wikipedia doesn't seem to know either. They say it's the collective name of a group of approximately 500 business entities of which U.S. President Donald Trump is the sole or principal owner.
That's basically it. The Trump organization is just the universe with which he's concerned. Yeah. Well, all right, it's a good question. We can't figure out which either of these things are. But here, the Trump campaign is named, which is why they asked Brad Parscale anything about this. Not that he would know. And then his job is to say, no, we didn't do anything wrong, and yes, we're going to win. Then there's another paragraph or so about people complaining that the whole thing is terrible and stupid. And then there's this little bit of information, which I alluded to earlier. The lawsuit echoes a similar legal tactic that the Democratic Party used during the Watergate scandal. In 1972, the DNC sued President Richard Nixon's re-election committee, seeking $1 million in damages for the break-in at Democratic headquarters in the Watergate building. The suit was denounced at the time by Nixon's Attorney General, John Mitchell, who called it a case of, quote, sheer demagoguery by the DNC. But the civil action brought by the DNC's chair, Lawrence F. O'Brien, was successful, yielding a $750,000 settlement from the Nixon campaign. It was reached on the day in 1974 that he left office. That's of some historical interest there. Whether it bears on what's happening here is still difficult to tell because you don't even know what you're dealing with at this point. I guess it's something you could envision holding as against the Trump campaign, because that's an entity we can get our heads around, and the rest of it is not. That's
an actual incorporated entity that exists as a corporate in a corporate form. So yes, that's actually fairly easy. They have registered agents wherever they do business or incorporated, probably all 50 states.
Many
presumably.
of whom have pled guilty along the way.
So getting them into court won't be that difficult.
Yeah. So let's see. More complaining from Brad Parscale, and then suing a. Well, that's what he's supposed to do. Suing a foreign country may present legal challenges for the Democrats, in part because other nations have immunity from most U.S. lawsuits, as you were mentioning earlier. The lawsuit argues that Russia is not entitled to sovereign immunity in this case because the DNC claims arise out of Russia's trespass onto the DNC's private servers in order to steal trade secrets and commit economic espionage. economic
Yeah,
espionage.
I'll put it to you this way: if that's true and that happened, and we believe it did, and there's immunity under the law for doing that, that's outrageous. Someone needs to change the law.
That would be problematic. Espionage can't be, protected activity. However, all right, so it does go on at some length, the rest of this article, but I think we've probably reached the point where we can extract anything of use from it. The rest of it is largely complaints about either how ridiculous it is or how ridiculous what the Russians did was. Although lots of names are dropped, it may be more valuable than we think, but we're getting to a break, and that may make us want to change direction. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Armando's still with us. I think we probably call a halt at this point to the discussion, any further discussion for today anyway, of the lawsuit. It's just sort of, as you mentioned, too early to make anything of it. It's a fascinating article in that it does cover things pretty thoroughly and combs through all the pages of it, and names are dropped willy-nilly, and they're all over the place, and you should take a look. It's interesting in the way it weaves a narrative, but I don't know that it adds anything new to our own narrative here. It pulls in the names of Joseph Mifsud and George Papadopoulos and the Agalarovs. And Scott Balber makes a reappearance finally as attorney for the Agalarovs in this. He's been involved in so many Trump cases, probably as many cases connected to Trump as what's his name that showed up as the lawyer for all of the women that Trump paid off that we discovered just the other day. There's another weird star in the Trump legal constellation, such as it is. But it is it's too early to spend this much time on it. We'll have to see what comes of it and whether it's revised at some point and let it take its course. I don't think it's going to change anything. I doubt very much whether it would change anything for Mueller. And I guess if it gets close to the point where the two inquiries are merging, I would expect to see the DNC perhaps backing off and backing away if it should come to the point where it might interfere with what Mueller is doing. That's the primary concern, I guess. But I suppose you could consider it a parallel inquiry in the way, like the OJ case. the legal case against them, or the criminal case against them, ends up collapsing, but the family then is in position to pursue civil cases later on. So,
can I talk to you about something else that's been in the discussion? And it's related in a sense. This use of the emails by news organizations, the stolen emails during 2016. Let me drop a fact that I did not remember or maybe never knew.
Okay.
Did you know that in 2008, Sarah Palin's emails were hacked?
I don't recall it as a hacking. But, yeah, now that you mention it, she certainly did call it that. Around Troopergate, as I recall, there was a lot of issue about, well, she was using private email, too, by the way, a private email server.
Using private email
to do government
exactly,
business, right?
She had a private server in her bathroom. I have no idea if it was that. But she did have, like, a Yahoo account that she was using.
Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with...
It got hacked.
Yeah.
It got hacked by some kid. And the kid, he was a kid of some Democratic official in Tennessee.
Okay.
And you know that, I did not know this, that the FBI prosecuted this kid. He went to jail.
Oh, I don't think I recall that, but that makes a certain amount of sense. It was an invasion of her privacy.
Privacy,
It's
no
dopey,
question.
but
I mean, but here's my point about bringing that up. I
Hmm.
just don't remember that much coverage, if any. Well, I didn't even remember the story, so obviously I don't remember any coverage of it. In 2008, there wasn't a story every day about what Sarah Palin said in her emails, was there?
no. There was stories early on. And also, I mean, the story of her being a complete idiot became much more sensational. But I do remember that there was the stories about the substance of what the emails were about. That, as I recall, was about Troopergate, and that she was under the impression that one or more Alaska state troopers had it in for her troublemaking oldest son. Which one is that? Track?
The one who's always in trouble?
Trip? Travis? Tyrone, what was
The one who beat up
right.
his father.
Yeah, and others.
That one, right?
Yes, and he was, he was constantly in trouble, and then there was speculation, right, that he got picked up on some charges, and the basically they got themselves in front of a judge that said, you know what, if the kid will join the army, I'll let him go, and
Which he did.
Yeah, he did. And
then I think he got dishonorably discharged or something.
Oh,
but anyway,
whoops.
that kid's a bad kid, and that's her personal business. I don't want to.
But yeah, and that was what the
so
substance of the hacked emails were
from
about.
Stolen emails.
Yeah, it was never about her doing, very briefly about her using, in some cases, public resources to handle family business, and then doing family business or doing government business over the private server. She mixed and matched. It didn't make any difference to her. And at the time, probably to most people, regular people were like, oh yeah, I guess that is wrong, isn't it? But whatever. It wasn't. But I remember her complaining that she had been hacked. But yeah, it wasn't really a big deal.
Okay, and then there's a news story that, again, I didn't know the stories were coming from stolen emails. Elliot Broidy's efforts to gain money from Middle Eastern governments for access to the Trump administration.
Okay.
And there have been a few stories on that. I hadn't followed
Brody.
it. I knew about it. Frankly, if you take out that he's a formal fundraiser for the Republican Party and for the Trump inauguration, that's what lobbyists do. So I'm not sure. I didn't pay that much attention to that part of the story, nor did I pay that much attention, frankly, to the fact that he paid Well, I did pay attention to that because it was so much money, $1.6 million.
Yeah.
But he paid her to have an abortion, so I guess that's
you need extra.
That costs a little bit more. I suppose.
So $1.5 million
$1.6
payoff.
million is the going rate.
I don't know, where he got that, and he must have been furious. By the way, or imagine that, right? I wonder if Cohen told him anything about how much Trump paid. He must have found out that, you're Trump, you fixed this for Trump, I need you to fix it for me. And he later finds out, you charged me $1.6 million. Well, he didn't charge him for that, but you charged him $250,000 for the fixer fee, but he negotiates a hush money fee of $1.6 million for this woman, and then I'm sure he later picks up the paper and says, Trump got it for $130,000. I paid more than 10 times as much. This is terrible. Michael Cohen, you're the worst.
That guy, I'm actually that character.
That's the guy we were talking about.
I mean, that Keith Davidson's going to be when his story comes out. Oh boy. But okay, so you got this Brody story, and it's based on emails that Brody says were stolen by Qatar. I don't know why Qatar would have stolen his emails, but they did. So he says. And the New York Times has written some stories about what the emails show, that him sending things for $2 million. You too can come to this party and meet the president. That kind of stuff. And I think his lobbying firm has either told him to leave or he left. I don't know. And okay, so there are these stories, and it says, well, what about the ethics of those? How come you're not complaining about us using those emails? I'll be honest with you. I didn't know they were using emails in those stories. Those aren't stories I followed that closely.
Yeah.
But then I read some of the stories this morning. I said, well, the newsworthy part is he was on the inauguration committee fundraising, and that's a big deal. and he was the vice chairman of the Republican Party Finance Committee.
Mm-hmm.
So, selling access for political purposes, not as a lobbyist per se, though, in essence, lobbyists end up being middlemen because they get the money, then they give it to the politician, et cetera. I mean, it's a dirty business, but again, that's how that business seems to work as I see it.
Yeah.
But the fact that there were some formal connections, okay, there's a newsworthy story there. But you should take a moment. Who's giving me this? Why? Why is Qatar giving this? Probably because they want to embarrass Brody, who's working for Saudi Arabia, maybe. I don't know. I don't know the whole story.
Yeah, he's connected to UAE.
And here's where I differentiate between those stories that might have been based on stolen emails versus the Podesta DNC emails. Literally, tell me one newsworthy story. Newsworthy meaning real news, not gossip.
Yes.
From the DNC Podesta emails. What's the email that you remember the most?
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
I saw
Podesta
people
emails?
talking about this morning, and no one
you
could
were
come up
upset.
with anything. I didn't. No, I didn't talk
The
about it. I
risotto
saw
email.
Yeah.
The risotto recipe. That's the one everybody remembers.
And I thought it was polenta, so I'm wrong.
It was
Or maybe-
risotto.
I don't know. Okay.
But the fact is, you knew it was some food recipe.
Yes.
That goes to show you how insignificant and stupid these email stories were. And they ran them every single day for a month.
Yeah, the Podesta emails, I don't recall there being anything. There was, at least with Clinton, the story was that there was a private
of course,
server.
The spirit stuff and the
Oh.
pizza gate came out of the Podesta emails.
Yes, right. Well, that was they just made garbage out of it. I mean, I suppose
That
I
may
could-
be, but some reporters reported on it.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's a huge problem all by itself. Like, if someone steals emails and they say, yes, please pick up some milk on the way home, and I call and say, milk, that's code for slaves. All right. If you'll print that, the problem is you printing it. That's not, what the source was. I'm not worried about that.
I mean, there's that, but there's more than that. It just lent itself to that. Every day, WikiLeaks, look, this proves that Hillary was a criminal.
Yeah, all right. Well,
she did, and then you'd read it, and it didn't prove.
Hey-o. You were correct, though.
It
We'll
doesn't
deal with that
prove
later.
anything. And they ran them and ran them and ran them. And even yesterday, Confessori said, and the evidence of the sabotage by the DNC of the Sanders campaign. And
yes,
evidence
right.
of what?
Well,
Where's that? Here's a problem right there. You just made it up. And, not just me, but 8 million people said, what are you talking about? And Confessori just ignored it.
Yes. I mean, that was the huge problem was you had this strange confluence of both the Trump campaign insisting that everything was evidence of Hillary Clinton's criminality and the Bernie Sanders campaign insisting the same. And I wonder whether that by itself created that weird condition among the press corps that, well, even the liberal and the conservative say it. So therefore, both sides. And so we'll cover this because everybody at every corner, every end of the spectrum is saying that this shows Clinton criminality or corruption. It's just that it was being made up by the most lunatic fringe of both groups, and then it turned out that the lunatic fringe of both groups was in fact just the lunatic fringe creation of one group in particular. I mean, that most of this ended up having been driven by Russian agents and their bots, as it turns out that the most virulent, outspoken, annoying, horrific Bernie bros were not, in fact, just regular people that had these wild ideas. In some cases they were, but they were largely driven by, provoked to it by the Russian efforts, because they knew that it would undermine everything, from the Hillary Clinton campaign to the presumed continuing legitimacy of the United States government when, as expected, she would win the presidency. So That's a pretty big problem.
I mean, I just think in any context, I like to think that if someone had leaked mundane, stolen emails from Trump that were just about campaign strategy, unless, there's something, racial epithets or something like that about people, that I would say, this is wrong. You shouldn't do this. If Russia had been against Trump and was doing that, I'd like to think I'd be against that. But listen, that's not even the point, though. You don't look at what I think. Look to yourself. Look to your own ethics. You're a reporter. Here's Mark Murray responding to Confessor. He says, to me, the difference between the Brody emails and with WikiLeaks 2016 was that WikiLeaks was an effort by an adversary to influence an election, not policy. The United States government said the adversary, Russia, was behind it on October 7, 2016, and one candidate was benefiting from it and campaigning on it. That seems a fair point to me. It doesn't seem to have any impact on the New York Times or Nick Confessori. And this is why you really can't trust the New York Times going forward, in my views, in terms of political reporting. Look, even this Brody story, which they were, look at them go after Brody. If someone hands you a story, you run it, right? They would have handed the story to somebody else if the New York Times wasn't the New York Times. There's nothing particularly praiseworthy about that, in my view. That's why all this leaks. Oh, they leaked to you. Well, if they leaked to me because I at a prominent newspaper, that's not great reporting, in my view. I really do differentiate between guys like, in his day, Wayne Barrett or the investigative team at the Washington Post, where they digged up David Fairholt. Nobody leaked to him. You know what he did? You know what he did.
Yeah.
He went and digged it up.
Right.
He didn't hang around and wait for somebody to slip something in his pocket.
Got a question raised from the public discourse in front of us that others were not pausing to ask, which now in hindsight is horrific because nobody would say. He basically just said, how do we know that this thing that the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself is telling us has any basis in truth whatsoever? Is he telling the truth? I will find out. Oh, well, very quickly I find out that the public record says no, and I will further develop the public record by asking everybody who's ever he has ever alleged to have made a philanthropic donation to. Where did the money come from? Did it come from Donald Trump or did it come from his foundation? And where did then track down where did the foundation money come from, and comes to the conclusion in that case and many others. He's just done that and said, I'm asking a basic reporter question. You just said that. Is that true? Not, so-and-so says it's true, but someone else in the other campaign says it's not true, and I'll just leave it there.
You know what I loved about the ProPublica article that I talked about the other day?
What?
That was just shoe leather reporting. I mean, that's going and digging up the documents and looking at the records. There was no sources. There was no access. It was, okay, let me go do the work.
Yeah, which...
are reporters just lazy now?
They have a lot of deadlines. To me, they're harried and rushed.
There needs to be, obviously, there's different types of reporting, but when your reporting is, I'm waiting to hear what sources inside the White House whisper in my ear, it's almost compromising. It's necessary, I get that, but it's not the pinnacle of the profession. And unfortunately, it shouldn't be the pinnacle of the profession, but unfortunately it has become the pinnacle of the profession. All these accolades for Maggie Haberman, and Maggie Haberman is no better or worse. Maybe she has some talent, but she has a bad lens in my view. But what is she doing? She's the reporter from the New York Times who's at the White House, and people whisper in her ear because she gets page one because she has a great relationship with her political editor. It turns out Amy Chozick, if you read between the lines, had a bad relationship with her editor. And she wasn't getting page one, so she's probably getting less people whispering in her ear. That's not talent, in my view.
Well, I suppose you could consider it talent to cultivate the relationships such that people come to you as a hub for these sorts of stories, but the stories have to be more worth it. I think.
Well, exactly,
it.
and the price you're paying to get that, because listen, you can beat it around the bush all you want, but she's often an apologist for Trump and the Trump administration. And then Trump yells at her every 5 months, but then he loves that she's the person covering him.
I
think that's obvious.
I think so.
And
we keep
I
seeing the
almost
pictures
think
of them.
Ruse, that goes on, that he rips her every few months to say, "See, I'm not in his pocket."
Yeah.
I think that's almost a put on.
Well, I can certainly see it that way.
I don't know where I was going with all this.
Me neither, but it was worth doing.
I'm railing about the New York Times, as I do every day.
Yes, well, it's hard not to. And all right, well, let's. Why don't we wrap it for the day? I'll share a few more stories with everybody. You're certainly welcome to hang on and comment.
No,
on
I'll let you get your show back on track after I
did
a. You know what really grinds my gears? Segment.
Well, people tune in for those because they're grinding their gears that way too.
That really grinds my gears. And
there you are.
I'm soft my chest, and I'll let you get back to actual real insight now
Andy
for at least
Rooney,
the next 8 minutes.
Gentlemen.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks, Armando. Last couple of things we'll throw in there for the day. Let's see. The Guardian had an interesting story. Not sure what comes of it just yet, but John Swain reporting for The Guardian on how Michael Cohen's case now shines a light on Sean Hannity's property empire. I thought the long story short on this one was, of course, Hannity ends up getting revealed the other day as the secret third client of Michael Cohen, and that was exciting and weird for sure. But like I said, long story short, Molly Knight, I think, had the best summary of this one. She saying about John Swain's article here. John Swain summarizes his article in a tweet by saying, Sean Hannity revealed as secret owner behind shell companies that have spent $90 million buying 870 plus homes across the U.S., sometimes with help from HUD and foreclosures. So I guess that raises the prospect of possibly what might be for Sean Hannity some sort of hypocrisy. And I don't believe that you should, be mooching off the government for your fortune. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, etc. But of course, investing in real estate, he thinks of himself as, now I'm a self-made man. I'm investing my money that I earn from my show, which is definitely far too much, as it is the case with almost anybody getting paid to do television shows. But that's where we are in this country. And so I'm going to build my fortune, pull myself up by my bootstraps even more and invest in real estate. But of course, if you're investing in real estate that's basically subsidized, being foreclosed upon, HUD is involved, I guess there's that issue. More to the point, though, when he was revealed as the third client and then denied being the third client and then tried to say, well, the only relationship I have with Michael Cohen, its lawyer-client, is I occasionally ask him for some, minor advice on real estate issues because he's a real estate guy in that he deals with Donald Trump. So he must know something about real estate, and I'm investing in real estate, and so I just chatted with him and asked his advice about something, and I might have paid him $10 for something or whatever, but we don't have a real relationship. But Molly Knight noting here, my dude, that is to say, Sean Hannity, my dude is shelling out $90 million on foreclosed properties and getting $10 legal advice from a Scooby-Doo lawyer who just got raided by the FBI. Nothing to see here. And I get the point. That's, I thought, well put. It doesn't sound like he's doing anything illegal. He's just, maybe he's a slumlord. That would suck, and some of that practice might actually be illegal. But, he's buying everything from distressed properties to mansions, apparently. And it's a little weird and also a little strange that he spends so much time, for instance, interviewing the HUD Secretary, Ben Carson, and not disclosing that he's benefiting significantly personally from HUD underwritten programs, But, so suppose he had cured that by saying so. I don't think it would change the nature of what he's doing or make it wrong or illegal in any way. But because Michael Cohen is involved and because Sean Hannity is dopey and likely to bend the rules at the margins, that may become interesting in the future. We'll keep an eye on it. And I just wanted to put it out for you that it is out there. I guess the last thing we'll squeeze in is some detail perhaps from the New York Times. The latest on Scott Pruitt being a lifelong grifter. We did get some background on the guy early on in the administration, and then of late we've heard some more specifics about his corruption. But writing here under the headline, Scott Pruitt before the EPA, fancy homes, a shell company, and friends with money. Largely, I think, going over ground we talked about earlier, but it's been some time. So Steve Eder, E-D-E-R, and Hiroko Tabuchi put together this weekend piece that I think is worth it for review. Early in Scott Pruitt's political career as a state senator from Tulsa, he attended a gathering at the Oklahoma City home of an influential telecommunications lobbyist who was nearing retirement and about to move away. The lobbyist said that after the 2003 gathering, Mr. Pruitt, who had a modest legal practice and a state salary of $38,400, reached out to her. He wanted to buy her Showplace home as a second residence for when he was in the state capitol. For those ego-minded politicians, it would be pretty cool to have this house close to the Capitol, said the lobbyist, Marcia Lindsay. It was stunning. Soon, Mr. Pruitt was staying there, and so was at least one other lawmaker, according to interviews. Mr. Pruitt even bought Ms. Lindsay's dining room set, art, and antique rugs. He said, he basically said, I need instant class. Give me this whole thing. Except, of course, he doesn't have nearly enough money to actually do that, and he's depending on his banker friends who are, as we learned earlier in the year, busy bankrupting their family bank in order to give him the loans he needed to pull this garbage off. Anyway, it's just sort of interesting and revealing, and the whole point of the article is that it becomes very quickly obvious that Scott Pruitt always viewed government service, whether serving the government of the state of Oklahoma or the federal government, always viewed government service as something that deserved to be compensated at the very highest levels, and though it was not, in fact, compensated at the highest levels, he was entitled to, and really the law ought to look the other way, on his stealing everything that he thought should come as an accoutrement of office. He thought, I'm a state senator. I should be living in a fancy house. Not only a fancy house, but a second fancy house while I'm in the Capitol. I should be making millions of dollars. I should have fancy offices. I should be flying first class when I'm EPA administrator. I should have access to huge amounts of money in slush funds. I should basically be able to do whatever I want. And if it takes some weird legal or maybe even illegal machinations to make it happen, so be it. And so he sets about the task early on in his career as a state senator, really a state senator in Oklahoma, has to put together a shell company, which he calls Capitol House LLC, in which he gets monies together with others and purchases this house. By the way, at a steep discount. Purchased the house, it says here, for $375,000, about a $100,000 discount for what the lobbyist had paid for it a year earlier. A shortfall, by the way, picked up by her employer, the telecom giant SBC Oklahoma. So lots of interesting detail in here that fills in the blanks about the early years of Scott Pruitt's grifting. And, of course, it is from that standpoint that he then runs and wins the office of Attorney General of Oklahoma. Already on the take and already self-aggrandizing, he runs for higher office and uses that as a launching pad for stealing yet more money and aggrandizing himself even further. It would have been a red flag to anybody who had bothered to look and actually vet the guy in his federal appointment. And I guess we're doing that now. It was just all was rushed through so quickly that we didn't really have an opportunity to get all of the story out on the record, and of course he was working in the shadow of the most corrupt person ever, and so I guess he didn't really stand out in that sense. And whoops, it didn't matter because a partisan Congress was just going to approve him anyway, and so to no surprise we end up with one of the most corrupt guys ever, not only as president but in almost every position in the cabinet. What can you do? So these are just the most shocking examples. Time now, though, to hand over the microphones to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let me see if we can grab a couple of those fun stories. How about this one? Chuck Todd played concern troll with DNC Chair Tom Perez over the timing and cost of the committee's lawsuit that we discussed earlier. Also on their menu for today, Montana Democratic House candidate John Heenan is buying up airtime on stations owned by Trump-friendly Sinclair Broadcasting Group and using it, though, to blast Sinclair Broadcasting. That is interesting. And New Jersey Republicans went broke throwing a doomed fundraiser at Trump's golf club. You'll hear all about that and more on the show right after these messages.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, okay, as discussed with Armando, the New York Times still cannot admit it botched a major Trump story from before the election. And then after their break, they move on to the chef's table. Ready for this one? Record profits that the big banks are raking in thanks to Trump's supposedly middle-class tax cuts, and the ancient Greek tragedies have much to teach us about James Comey.